Hey, what's up everybody? Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics. Welcome back. So today's video, I'm going to show you how to do some coloring techniques inside of Photoshop on this Spider-Man fan art piece. So let's get started. So what I got over here are my groups and my layers, and this is the way I like to work. I'll show you how I first set up things. So let's start with Spidey here. And the very first thing that I do, I'll create a new layer for this. See, I've already created a few. And I'll make sure that transparent pixels are locked. And this is the red part of his suit, right? So I itemize each area. I usually start with a mid-tone of whatever, I think the color of the character is going to be. In this case, we know Spider-Man's color there, or roughly. Now keep in mind there's a lot of style variations to the way that people color Spider-Man. This is just my particular way to do it. So I'll start with a tone like that, pretty basic. And these are what are referred to as flats. So I'll do the same thing for the blue. Now keep in mind, I have it set to multiply. You don't have to. Just keep it to normal. And I'm going to show you how I set up the initial. And that's what happens when transparent pixels aren't locked. Okay, so there's that. So essentially, I'm just blocking in the color, the flat color, like that, to get started. So, and I would recommend you do that to every element in the scene. You see I didn't do this building back here. It's actually the color of the background. I start with what I consider a mood color, and I work up from there. That's just something that I do. I don't know that that's the right way or whatever. But essentially, flat in all your separate elements, and what that allows you to do is to really edit your work quickly. So I can add all these effects, and I can move things around, or not even really move them around, but work behind the line work really quickly. So the way that I do that is I have the artwork in the very background layer back here, and then I have another copy of it right here, and that's set to multiply. Now, I don't know that this is going to work for everybody. For print methods, you'll have to check what your end results are for your artwork. For me, I only do digital artwork and digital uploads, so this works fine for my visual representation, what I do. But what this affords me the opportunity to do is paint all these layers and groups in between those two sets of line works, and not worry about looking like this. I've got the line work up front by setting it to multiply. So now what I do is I grab each layer and I start to apply effects to it after I get all my flats in. So for instance, if I'm working on Spidey here, let's zoom up a bit. I'll start with adding a highlight source or you know what, actually I'll start with the darker tone. So I'll grab one of my brushes here. Let's start with the chalk painter brush. I'll select the mid-tone right there. I'll get a darker version of it, something into here, and then I'll just start to just paint in there, and I can play with the opacity of the brush, but I like to start with a pretty opaque brush at this point. That way I can really just build up this tone without worrying about if it's a lighter opacity, you're going to get funky artifacts when you overlap. So if I work with a full opacity, I can kind of control that a bit better. So I just build in some of these shadows real quick here. Doesn't got to be perfect. Never seen a perfect piece anyways. But who knows, you could be the first to create perfection. So I do that. I'll do a little bit of the shadow against this this ridge here, this highlight, because as you know from studying life and things like that, whenever there's a bright light source, which is what this line's supposed to represent, there's usually a shadow, or there is a shadow, right off that light source as it rounds over the form. So we'll just throw that in there real quick. And then what I do I missed a little bit right there. I'll jump through a few of these sections because I want to explain more of the process than, showing you a full colorized session of what I would do here or whatever. Okay, so now to add the light source, I'll kind of cheat sometimes and grab the dodge tool, set the highlight, and I'll just punch up some quick light sources. And keep in mind, this is only if it looks right. If I do it and it doesn't look right, then I go back to just sampling my own colors from the color swatch and painting those in. But I think this looks pretty accurate, so I'll get some of this light source in there with the dodge tool. Like that. I'll hit some of these brighter areas. And the other thing I'll tend to do when I'm coloring this way is, because I don't like to use the dodge tool too much. I'll use a little bit, but I like to sample some of my colors as well. So what I'll do is I'll sample some of the color from maybe here, And I'll hit X to flip these two so I keep my dark color. And I'll select this, and I'll check the color over here. And it's a bit too saturated for what I want, so I'll go to just a little bit more of an orange. I've noticed from studying other cool Spider-Man pics, a lot of artists will add some orange in there, and I think that looks pretty cool on the suit. So, so you're just kind of picturing the way that light would react against this, this suit color, and a yellow light source like the sun would probably cast some yellow on the suit and create some orange. So there's just a lot of little thought process things that you do. Like another one is, would I see a little bit of edge lighting on his back? Light bounces around all over the place. So maybe there's just a little bit of bounce light and edge lighting on parts like that. And maybe not. You just kind of throw them in there, and if they look great, then keep them. If they don't, then get them out of there. So just paint back and forth and figure out what looks cool. And then drop in little bits of it here and there to round out the forms. Simple as that, or at least the way that I do it anyways. So that's essentially how I would paint through the character. And then, you get into a bunch of other things like, okay, if this was a nighttime scene, would the light next to him be a blue? So maybe you incorporate some of that blue in there. If you go to do the suit here, same thing, make sure the pixels are locked so that you paint in the confinements of that area. Maybe drop in some quick edge lighting, with the dodge tool, see how that looks. Grab a darker tone from this blue, maybe something into here, a little darker. Let's make sure we're on a soft brush and paint some of that in. Again, just trying to round out the form and picture where light would be and where it wouldn't be. So little things like that. And then you can get in here again with a soft or a hard brush, but I would say a hard brush. You want to mix up hard and soft brush effects throughout your paint work to give it a little more variety. So you could do this. Another thing that you can do right here is you could create a selection off the existing layer. So I'll just go to, this is already selected. And this is the beauty of flats. Let me show you that. You go select, load selection, hit OK. And just like that, you got this really ugly selection, but it's good because it already looks visually correct. So there's your selection. Create a new layer, and call it, I don't know, blue suit overlay or something. Blue suit overlay. And the other neat thing is, since we're already in our groups of Spidey, you really don't have to give it too much of a. I think I misspelled that. Anyways, you don't have to give it too much of a definitive title because it's it's in that group, so you're good anyways. Everything in here is under Spidey, so that's where groups really helps you out. And so now you can paint with this a little bit. It's kind of more experimental. You can say, well, what if I had a really bright blue on this other side? Would it be too much? Which I'm thinking it will be. But I just want to show you how to experiment. And then maybe I smudge that color around and blend it in. You don't have to worry because it's not part of that other color. You created a selection, a new layer. So you can try something like that, deselect, toggle it on and off. I don't know that it did anything good for that piece, but that's how I would work through parts like that and experiment and play around with different things. So that's how I paint that. So let me get rid of that there and go back to what I had. I think that was a little bit better. Okay, so now let me show you how I would do some other parts. So the other thing, I've showed you how I have the line work in front and behind, and you're probably wondering what these layers up here are. Well, these are overlay layers and screen layers. So for instance, with the smoke up here, I didn't want the smoke to be as intrusive or in your face that it was when I just did the solid paint. So here's me painting just a gray flat and then taking the soft brush and just brushing a couple highlight sources. I'll show you. So lock transparent pixels, grab a lighter tone like gray, like white, whatever, and just take the soft brush or hard brush, whatever you feel comfortable with, but I usually take a soft brush for something like this, and I'm just getting in here and I'm sizing the brush up and down as I go, and I'm trying to get a little bit of billowing or flowing to that smoke. So I'll paint back and forth and do that, but the only bad thing is no matter how much I paint, it's still not going to cover up that line work. And so that line work is going to be more in your face and kind of, that bright comic book style or whatever. So the way to kind of fix that is you can do overlay and screen modes, and screen mode will actually cover the line work with whatever color, so all the way to, that's full opacity. Now I didn't want it quite that much. It almost looks like a sticker or something at that point. So I tone it back, and then I also incorporated a little bit of an overlay layer to change the color of the smoke a bit more. Now it did wash out some of my effects. So again, I would play with the opacity to get it a nice mix of all that, where you see some of the effect. The line work gets changed a bit. Maybe I don't even need the overlay layer. But that's what these layers are. This is when I decide to paint more in the foreground. And if you notice, I even painted right outside of the edge of the line work as a solid shape, just to, give it a small highlight, which I thought looked cool. But that's purely style and purely preference, but that's how I do that. And again, for organizing, I could take all these layers. I could click the group icon right here, double click here, and name these just overlay layers. And I know that based on the position, they're over the line work, that's primarily what I'm doing there. That any little last minute light sources, highlights, I might use up here. So there's Spidey. And now let me show you how I did this building on the left, because I think that's another one that'll explain a little bit of the quick effects that you can do inside Photoshop for your paint work here, or colorization work. So that would be building on the left corner. Is that it right there? So expand this one. And what I did here is I've got the brickwork right there as one layer, and that's my highlights on the brick there, which really didn't have to do on a separate layer, but I did. And there's the brick on the top of the building. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this. And the reason it got darker right there is because it's set to multiply. You don't have to do that. That's just another way that I color, but you could set these to normal, and then you just have to paint more solid effects or whatever. I set it to multiply, and it actually took some of the background color and placed it with it. So there's normal mode, and this is the bricks. I'll get rid of the other area so it's not distracting. So there's the bricks in the top. Okay, so live transparency here. I'll go ahead and paint in my base color. Let's just grab the square painter here. And since these two aren't touching, I can just easily paint in here. Hit X on the keyboard, just swap my colors there. Grab the gray right here. I actually want that a lot darker, but it's real easy because of that lock transparency in those flats. And let's do the same thing over here. So there's the top portion, or the brick portion, Command J. And I could just double click that and name that. Let's just call it bricks. Top. Something like, just easy to remember stuff. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. So let's lock transparency here. Let's grab the mid-tone. Now the other thing that I try to do with something like this, I try to stay desaturated for the background and the buildings for as long as possible. And the reason being is I'm trying to make the effect that Spider-Man is really popping off the page. So if I add more saturation to him, like you can see here, it's going to separate him from the background more. So just so you know what my idea is there. And I'm not the most advanced colorist, so I don't know if that's entirely accurate way to do it, but that's the way that I'm working through it. That's my thought process. Okay, so there's my two layers. Let's bring those together so it's a little less distracting. And this is how I would colorize it. So there's my top surface. I would take, probably starting out with something like this, I would take the soft brush, and let's go with a bit of a darker tone here. And let's just brush in some shadow and taking cues from the line work that's already there. Now this is something I drew, so I know exactly what I was thinking when I put in a lot of these lines. But if you're working with another artist's work, you just got to remember that a lot of these little shading lines and things they're putting down are cues. Not something you got to follow entirely, but you want to keep in mind of what they were kind of illustrating and work from that, obviously. So even though I'm working from my own artwork, I'm remembering some of the cues that I put down in my initial illustration here. All right, so let's get maybe a little bit of drop shadow from here. you see, I can just draw that in pretty easily because of the lock transparency feature. I don't have to worry too much about it. A little bit of shadow coming up from the building to make it appear like it's you know, taller or transcending space there, I guess. Okay, so that's how I would get a good amount of the shadow in that area. But you see, it still doesn't look very great. It doesn't look impressive. Now, the other thing that we could do with lock transparency and flats is that we can select really quickly behind the line work like this. Double click here. And that ugly little selection is actually all we need because it's isolated on the edge by the lock transparency feature. So I can take a little bit darker tone now and maybe show the plane change a little bit more. You know, so really try to push the feeling that this you know, that there's two different light sources on this this building, which there would be. And then Command-Shift-I will allow us to flip that selection. And now I can reverse that effect over here and grab a brighter, maybe a touch more saturated light source. And I can hit the top of these bricks just a little bit. And if I deselect, you can see that it's really helped to kind of shape that a bit. Command Z to go back. And now let's take that brighter light source. I'm just spitballing here. I don't know if this will look right, but experimentation is the road to success or something. I don't know. To the road to improvement. Let's say that. So let's take the highlights here and just hit just the edge of these bricks just a little bit. You know, and remember, if you're unsure about this, just create a new layer. But you can always paint back. It's not like this took us some absorbent amount of time to get to where we're at. So just these little bits of highlights here and there just to kind of make it seem a bit more dimensional, even in the crack there, even in the edge of the crack there, whatever. You know, this is all preference. Double click here to straighten it back out. Command-Shift-I. And even though this is more in shadow down here, I'm going to add just a little bit of highlight right there. And, you know, again, and this is something I don't know that I want, and I don't know if I want to repaint that. Just add a layer. You know, it's real easy peasy. Oh, but keep in mind, since I did add the layer, I got to remember my transparency is no longer locked. I could paint outside of that. Glad I remember to say that. Somebody would be like, man, it quit working for me. But that's something. By adding a layer, you're no longer going to have the control of the lock transparency for that particular part. But you do still have the control of the line work being in front of it, so it still works. So just the reason why I wanted to show you this on another layer is because if I didn't want this to be too bright, to kind of be as bright as what you would see on the top, I can easily drop the opacity of that just a little bit if I wanted. I think it looked good bright, but we'll say just a little bit less bright than the areas up there. Command D to deselect. Now, one last thing I want to show you. If you think that you're going to use selections like this a lot, and you don't want to keep having to go back and reselect, even though you see it didn't take a large amount of time, just go select, save selection. And you know, same thing, building, you could name these buildings, I guess. Building, left, bottom, select, whatever. I guess you could just give them a numeric value, but it'd get pretty messy. All right, so there's that one, deselect, and if I need it, I can just go select, load selection, and drop this down, and it's going to be in there. So there's that. Okay, so now I'll show you how I did the top portion of that surface as well. So the top would be right here, the rooftop or whatever. Select this again with the polygonal tool, making sure to stay behind the line work. And then the thing I like to do on a surface like this, I don't like everything looking the same as far as all of it being smooth, so I just want to give it a little bit of texture. Go filter, noise, add noise. Play with the amount, amount right here. I don't want it too in your face. I'll say something about right there. And then I'll usually put just a little bit of a blur to it. So Gaussian blur. And you see that makes it look just a little bit more like a rooftop. And then the burn tool like this. Burn tool is another quick way to drop in some shadow, or you could just take, a darker tone like this with the soft brush, throw it down there. and just brush some of that in. Now if you don't want to get rid of the texture as you're doing that, just set this to darken or multiply. I think multiply. Yeah, see how if you zoom up real close, that texture's still in there. So, but it's a little too in your face. Let me do just a little bit less opacity. I just want a little bit of shadow right there. I don't want it to all look the same. Same thing, I can grab the dodge tool and I can just punch up a little bit of light source like that. And then let's say that let's deselect this now. So Command D to deselect. Transparency is locked. Let's turn this and say I wanted just a hard edge shadow right here for the look of the the brick casting a drop shadow. I could just select that really quickly like this right there, kind of envision the perspective a bit like that, and brush that in really quickly. And again, because it's set to multiply, it's going to keep some of that texture, which I like. So double click here, and just like that, you got a bit of drop shadow. It's actually crooked right there. Whoops. Bad architecture. Somebody didn't build that building right. So right here, bricks and top copy. Let's do the bricks real quick. So same thing, and I'm really just repeating this process. Now, one thing I will point out with the bricks, I started too saturated. And again, I don't want this particular part of the artwork to be as saturated. I can just go Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. I've got that selected. I've got Lock Transparency, protecting my edges. Drop the saturation, like that. So it's real easy to control parts of your colorization with that effect. Let's go ahead. I don't need this selection now. I just wanted to isolate it from dropping the saturation to both of these since they were on the same layer. Okay, so now let's repeat the process. Just a little bit of a dodge, not too much because we're picturing that this side is a bit more in shadow. Let's get back to our darker color, get it a bit darker, and let's do a bit more shadow here. Let's do a bit of a drop shadow here, bit of a drop shadow or edge shadow against there. And you could really get in here and do each brick if you wanted. I don't think that's necessary. I could probably do a few, I guess, just to show you the way that I would do it. The way that I would do the bricks if I was wanting to really get in there and just go crazy on it, I guess, is I would add the drop shadow to the back of the brick here, like this. Then I would reverse the selection, hold Alt, select the brighter color, change it to a significantly brighter, maybe a touch more saturated, but we'll say right there is fine. And then I would paint that or color that. Oh, remember it's got to be set to normal or screen or something brighter. And I would just hit the front of the bricks. So it's such a simple thing, but I figured I would explain it. You want to shadow the back or the bottom of the brick. You want to highlight the top of the brick, from this angle or whatever. So, but again, I don't think I would want to do every brick. I'd do a few of them maybe, and then just punch up a light source somewhere right there. And that's really what I would do to do that to each building, to repeat that process. So I would drop in the flats for each change in color. Like this building is probably the furthest that I would take it. I don't know that there's a whole lot of tritone buildings in the city, but maybe there is, and that's how I would separate elements of it and then go back through and color it. So that's really it. It's a pretty simple process, so you just remember that you can create a line work on the front, line work to the back, paint in between, do groups to separate your work and make it a little bit easier to understand when you've got all these various things going on. And yeah, that's about it. So hopefully this video has taught you a few things about how you could color your own artwork. I had this request a while ago, but I kind of dodged it because I'm not big on coloring. I do more black and white, and I do digital painting, but it's a different process. But I figured I would finally address that in more detail, so here it is. Hopefully this has been beneficial for you. If it has, be sure to like and share the videos. And remember that you can support the work that I do here by either getting something from my Gumroad page, where there's like custom brushes. These brushes that you saw here are available there. And then also, my Patreon page, where you can support the work that I do and get high-res downloads of my image work. So let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see in the future. Drop that in the comments section below. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.